give us a little bit of background information. We've actually had from the Media Research Center, Brent Bozell joined Patrick Bet-David on the PBD podcast. It was episode 398. If you have not seen it, you should go and watch it. It's actually a quick watch. It's about an hour, but we get into how Facebook has interfered in U.S. elections in the past and how we could possibly prevent that from happening in the future. But Dan, tell us a little bit about your background and what you do for the Media Research Center.
Well, I used to be a lawyer, used to practice law, and I thought that I was leaving the cesspool of law to move to D.C. and work here. Of course, I've just discovered that I'm working in a different swamp. But I'm a lawyer. I've been working on free speech issues for quite a while. So I joined MRC about 1.5 years ago. My primary fight is against big tech censorship. But the censorship of speech is ubiquitous, and it's un-American. I'm sure I agree with every one of your panelists today that what is needed is more speech, not less, if we're going to have a healthy, vibrant democracy.
Now, we've all been aware of censorship when it comes to big tech regarding Twitter, because after Elon Musk purchased Twitter and turned it into X, there were the Twitter files. But what other big tech companies have been involved in suppressing information regarding elections, suppressing free speech, or outright election interference?
Well, the short answer is every single one of them, except for Parler. But of course, these big tech platforms teamed up to take down Parler as well, including Google and Amazon. But every one of these big tech platforms is run by liberals, and they're staffed by liberals at the highest levels. And these people have the idea that any time that we disagree with them, that is then disinformation or misinformation or malinformation and harmful to what they think of as democracy. So we have to be silenced. And of course, the opposite is true. We're going to have a healthy, vibrant economy, a healthy, vibrant society. We have to have disagreement and be able to express our opinions. So but the biggest offender of all, frankly, is Google. Google, it's not a platform like Facebook and Twitter where you have your own accounts. So people sometimes miss how Google is doing it. But my colleague Gabriela Perso first wrote a big piece on Google, but then the follow-up one is on Facebook, and Facebook is getting worse and worse and worse.
If you're just joining us, this is the Vice President of Free Speech from the Media Research Center, Dan Schneider. Dan, so when you say Google is the worst offender and Americans or people using Google don't even recognize how Google is influencing elections or suppressing free speech, could you give us some examples of how they're doing it?
Yeah. For about 3 months, we ran the same 2 sets of search queries, and we ran them before each one of the Republican presidential campaign debates, but then throughout that same time period, we would repeat these. 2 different searches, one for Democrat presidential campaign websites and the other for Republican presidential campaign websites. No surprise, when we did the search for Democrat presidential campaign websites, Joe Biden was the #1 search result. His campaign. Up in the top 5 was also Marianne Williamson. Curiously, Hillary Clinton's old campaign website and Bernie Sanders' old campaign website was also produced. But nowhere would Google ever produce RFK's website for 3 straight months. Joe Biden's biggest threat to renomination, RFK, Google would not give you his campaign website. But even more surprising, when you look for Republican presidential campaign websites, Google for 3 straight months would only give you 2 campaign websites. Marianne Williamson, again, of all people, a Democrat, the only other campaign website that Google would give you was, at the very bottom of search results, was a guy named Will Hurd, who never broke 1% in national polling. But Google would not give you Donald Trump's campaign website, not Ron DeSantis, not Vivek Ramaswamy, not any of the others. Only Marianne Williamson and Will Hurd.
Now, this isn't the first time that your company, the Media Research Center, has found Google interfering in the election process before. Can you give us some other examples of when they've interfered in elections?
Well, there's so many examples. And of course, Google either does not respond at all or they dissemble in their response. But here's another example. In the 2022 midterm elections, we did similar results, queries for Senate Republican candidates, or rather Senate candidates, Republican or Democrat. And in 10 out of 12 times, Google completely buried the Republican for one of the swing districts, one of the swing Senate races. 10 out of 12 times, Google completely buried the Republican, but highlighted the Democrat. Now, we did alternative searches in Bing, DuckDuckGo, and Tusk. And all three of those search engines would produce fair results. Republican and Democrat campaign websites alike were in the top 5 typically of search results. Google stood alone in highlighting the Democrat, burying the Republican. And then, Rob, when Herschel Walker, you may recall, had a runoff in Georgia. So we got a little more sophisticated, and we did these searches at the precinct level. And this shows how sensitive Google is, how sinister it is. In the Democrat-leaning precincts, there was no bias. In the Republican-leaning precincts, no bias. But where the Democrat candidate needed to get the additional votes in those swing precincts, that's where Google again was biased. You couldn't find Herschel Walker's website if you lived in a swing precinct, but you could certainly find Warnock's website, the Democrat, and of course he ended up winning.
So Google has been in existence since September 4th, 1998. It was founded in Menlo Park, California. That means since Google's inception in 1998, there have been 7 presidential elections that have occurred here in the United States. Dan, in your opinion, or maybe through the research that you have done at the Media Research Center, how far back can you track Google actually interfering in U.S. elections?
That's really hard to tell because, our work is done in real time. But I've got a friend who is a very senior executive at Google, and she has told me that she saw the difference in 2015. Before 2015, back when Google's motto was "Don't be evil," she thought that her company was doing really good work, providing information to the public. And in 2015, she saw a huge swing at Google, and she started to express her concerns. And that's when Google completely went off the rails. But we've seen Google do other things even before 2015, maybe the precursor to when they just completely lost the thread of their logic. And now, of course, they use their resources specifically to turn elections in favor of the left.
This is Dan Schneider. He is the Vice President of Free Speech at the Media Research Center. For all things Media Research Center, mrc.org or mrcfreespeechamerica.org. VT's very own writer, sex icon, and symbol. Look at him. He also unbuttoned the top button.
He wants a favor. That's what he wants.
I do. But look, he's trying to match. He's trying to outsex you, Dan. Dan also has the top button unbuttoned. And now look, Shane has stepped up his game and he has unbuttoned his shirt. And now he has a question for you, Dan. Go ahead.
Well, thank you for that introduction,
You're
Rob.
welcome.
So Dan, what can free speech advocates do to get around this? I mean, some people say to use DuckDuckGo. Should everyone be using X? Should everyone be using Truth Social? Should everyone be contacting their local congressman, asking them to do something specific? Like, what would you say are the best things that we can do to fight against this? Because obviously Google is extremely powerful. They have they're the size of small countries in terms of their GDP. What could we do to fight against this behemoth?
Yeah, well, there are very practical things people can do in their private lives, like if you have to use Google, and there are alternatives like Tusk. Tusk is the one true neutral search engine out there. The others that you mentioned, like DuckDuckGo, they're still run by the left, and DuckDuckGo claims that it will not track your searches and keep your data, but they actually don't claim not to be biased. But again, we did see that DuckDuckGo was much more fair to the Republican candidates in 2022. But if you have to use Google, don't bother with the first page of search results. Go to the second or third pages of search results if you actually want a balanced view. But there's also Tusk to use. Other things, there are several state attorneys general who are doing really good work fighting against Google. One of those is right there in your home state of Florida. In Texas, Missouri, Louisiana, Utah, these AGs are taking on big tech and doing really fine work. The Secretary of State in West Virginia, Mac Warner, he's the first Secretary of State to start to really look into whether these big tech platforms are violating the law when they are using their resources specifically to influence elections. Those should be either in-kind contributions or independent expenditures, both of which are supposed to be reported, supposed to be filed with the Federal Election Commission or the state boards. And these big tech companies are in violation of the law one way or the other.
Humberto, I know you had a question for Dan.
Actually, Shane, that's a great segue to my question. Because, we used to go, because he said, just not go on the first page of results. But with the rise of AI, like people are not even combing through the results. So they go in there, they ask a question, they don't browse through the different results, and they just get an answer. So like these layers of complexity in algorithm, that is usually programmed by someone that leans, left probably, is getting more complicated. Do you think we're going to get, I'm sorry to be that guy, and I'm bringing the black pill here, do you think we're going to get to a point that machine learning and AI, it won't make, like, we won't have a chance against it when it comes to getting our information?
Yeah, Umberto, you raise a great point. Right after the October 6 attacks by Hamas on Israel, we did a study on Google's AI tool. Back then it is known as Bard. Today it's known as Gemini. But Google's AI platform would not tell us what the capital of Israel is. It would tell us what the capital of all of the four bordering nations are of Israel and the capital of any other country on the planet, but not Israel. It also would not tell us what Hamas is, even though it was happy to tell you what the Irish Republican Army is, Black Lives Matter, and I know Connor's going to get into BLM a little later. But Gemini would tell you what BLM is, but not Hamas. And then of course, a few weeks later, Gemini, your listeners will remember that Gemini, when people asked, well, show us a picture of the founding fathers, they would show a black George Washington, or show us a picture of a Nazi, and it would be,
remember that,
an Asian person in a German Nazi uniform.
And I have
Gemini was
they ran the study, and I saw it. Well, actually, I think it was 3 weeks ago. Some Google employees got into the office to protest inside the office, and they had to be taken away by police. It's terrible. On a second, like in a follow-up question, how much, because I do this for a living, even though putting things on the internet, how much do you think is their business model, and how much do you think is actual ideological? Because like the business model for Google, YouTube, and everyone is to pay to show stuff, and hiding stuff is a good business model. I don't know.
Yeah, well, Google is just a giant cash machine. It has a near monopoly on search and other things. They're just raking in dough. But if you ask business professors around the country how efficient Google is, they'll tell you it's massively inefficient. They waste tons of money. It is not focused on profit maximization. It is focused on pursuing a radical left-wing agenda. You can tell by their own financial statements and their income statements and balance sheets. They waste so much money. And the only good news here, Umberto, is that Google is behind the AI game. Other AI platforms like ChatGPT and OpenAI, they are far ahead of Google in the AI system because Google is so badly run.
Well, this is Dan Schneider from the Media Research Center, mrc.org or mrcfreespeechamerica.org. You can also follow him on social, X specifically, at Schneider_DC. Dan, thank you so much for joining us today. We greatly appreciate it, and we look forward to having you back on the Unusual Suspects in the future.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Rob.